By the way, who is this on the left-hand side of Pope Benedict the 16th? By the way, you may have seen messages handed out by me, written by this lady you see on the left. Messages that have been condemned by many inside of the church, but if it was condemned by the church, you wouldn't have this man standing next to her on the right-hand side. I'll first show you the article that goes with this picture, then a message that depicts the struggle that's happening inside of God's church, where the messages she writes gets condemned. And because I'm handing some out, I get condemned, calumniated. They do several things, try to get me to stumble and fall. And I may stumble and fall. I mean, Peter denied Christ 3 times with an oath. We all need to be humble, not pass judgment on others. If we tend to do that, we have to fall, so we have the humility we need. But the ones that try to cause me to fall, or etc., are really attacking her and the message. And they're attacking her because they're attacking a message. So let's go to the dialogue that goes with this photograph. Dialogue says, between 2001 and 2004, Mrs. Vasila Redain had an official dialogue with the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, CDF, in the Vatican that was requested by the then prefect of the CDF, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, right here, now Pope Benedict XVI. The purpose of the report is not to provide cheap propaganda for Mrs. Vasila Redain, but rather to offer some balanced and detailed insight into the progression and outcome of this dialogue. It must be emphasized here that the dialogue did take place and that it reached a cautious but positive conclusion. A cautious but positive conclusion. The entire dialogue between Mrs. Redain and the CDF was published in the form of a booklet in the year 2004, which is on the internet. And at the specific request of Cardinal Ratzinger, in all subsequent versions of Mrs. Redain's books entitled True Life in God, TLIG, reminiscent of other cases of CDF critique that were clarified through dialogue. As it will become clear in this report, Cardinal Ratzinger had first declined when asked in 1999 to meet Mrs. Redain because of the situation with the notification, as he put it. That means he declined meeting with her, let alone that there be a photograph with her. However, what he did offer was an official dialogue with the CDF. It was this dialogue and its positive outcome, I repeat, with this dialogue and its positive outcome that made it possible for Cardinal Ratzinger to receive Mrs. Redain, along with the writer of this article, which is not myself, but it says in the letter myself, that's Niels Christian Witt, in private audience in November 2004, during which I, that is, Niels Christian Witt, took the picture below. It was Niels Christian Witt who took the picture. And by the way, it must be emphasized that this picture is to be published only with this report, which is what is being happened right now in the video, is a report. It must be understood that the dialogue in itself entails no official approval, and the quote is put around the words approval, emphasizing that whether there's personal approval or not by Pope Benedict XVI, who is then Cardinal Ratzinger, is an entirely different issue. In his long article that's in the PDF file, it talks about how he wanted them to get rid, that is, Cardinal Ratzinger wanted them to get rid of the notification in 1995 and have a new notification, but that he has to be obedient to them, as he put it. Now, as the Pope, he would certainly like the notification to go away, is what this seems to indicate. But this is my strong opinion based on the long article that's in the PDF file. This is the short article, which is only 2 pages long. If you want the long article, you go on to cdf-tlig.org and you download the PDF of full report. Now, it must be understood that the dialogue in itself entails no official approval, and the quote around the word approval, of the True Life in God messages experienced by Mrs. Redain. The notification of 1995 with some critical comments on Mrs. Redain's experience, remains formally in effect. Only the publication of a new notification could, quote, cancel, unquote, the former of 1995, and such publication most likely not occurred during Mrs. Redain's lifetime, given the Vatican's always careful stance on alleged mystics still living. So now the word cancel is under quotes. Cancel meaning that even if there is a brand new notification that says forget the notification of 1995, the notification of 1995 would still be officially there, because the Church always keeps records of historical events and progressions that have occurred. There's still notifications against Faustina Kowalska still on record. But of course she's declared a saint, so it didn't like disappear. It's still on record, but it's more like historical record. However, this doesn't mean that the notification 1995 is a mere historical record, obviously, but it should be seen in the light of new developments. And you should see the progression of development, the whole thing, and not just one thing. If somebody shows you the notification 1995 and that's it, well, that's not honest. Totally not honest. But anyway, again, it says, only the publication of a new notification could cancel the former of 1995, and such publication most likely not occur during Mrs. Redain's lifetime, given the Vatican's always careful stance on alleged mystics still living. Again, quote around the word cancel, meaning that new developments don't necessarily get rid of what was written in the past, but new developments may even contradict what's in the past, so you may want to consider that. Now, when Mrs. Redain asked Cardinal Ratzinger during this audience what the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith would reply when asked about her status, he answered, well, we would say that there have been modifications in the sense that we have written to the interested bishops that one should now read the notification in the context of your preface and with the new comments that you have made. See below in dialogue. So, what's in quotes, I will explain. He says, well, what we would say that there have been modifications in the sense that we have written to the interested bishops that one should now read the notification in the context of your preface and with the new comments that you have made. In other words, if you read the notification and you don't read her answers to the notification, you're violating what it says in the scriptures in the book of Proverbs, where Solomon, who wrote the Proverbs, says, when one man testifies, his testimony seems valid until someone else comes up with his evidence, such as a cross-examiner, or the defendant has his turn to speak, and he says his piece. It's that's not a quote from Proverbs, but it's written in Proverbs, and it's common sense. Okay, now there are at least 3 reasons why Niels Christian Witt took it as his duty to relate the facts of the dialogue. 1. Niels Christian Witt first requested the dialogue of the then Cardinal Ratzinger following an interview with him published in Communio in 1999 and elsewhere. Now, 2. From 1997 to 2001, Niels Christian Witt wrote his doctoral degree on the issue of Christian prophecy at the Pontifical Gregorian University. It contains a paragraph on the case of Mrs. Redain as a possible historical example of an experience seen by many as prophetic. It was published by Oxford University Press in 2007, with the foreword written by the then Cardinal Ratzinger. See Christian-prophecy.org. You can go to Christian-prophecy.org to get more. After the said doctoral studies, Niels Christian Witt taught theology at the Pontifical Gregorian University, and thus he lived in Rome from 1997 to 2004 and was able to closely follow and engage in the dialogue. Hence, Niels Christian Witt is a witness to all that occurred. 3. Some people have raised doubts concerning the legitimacy or positive nature of the dialogue, partly because of a somewhat enigmatic letter from Cardinal William Levada, the present prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, dated January 2007, that Niels Christian Witt will put into perspective below. Thus, with this report, Niels Christian Witt wishes to dispel possible doubts concerning the legitimacy and positive outcome of the dialogue. The report covers the following: the preamble of the dialogue from 1995 to 1999, The dialogue itself from 1999 to 2004 that was concluded with the aforementioned meeting between Cardinal Ratzinger and Mrs. Redain. The subsequent developments arising from Cardinal Levada's letter of January 2007, and all letters mentioned in this report are on file with the author. For important purposes, copies can be obtained by contacting Niels Christian Witt at n.c@hvid.com. Best regards, Niels Christian Witt, Associate Professor, Research Unit of Health, Man, and Society, University of Southern Denmark. This actually deserves to have a link open up for the article to get the full PDF report of what he said. This is important. It is not fair to the pontiff or you or me that we only see one side of the story. We need to see the whole thing regarding this particular article. In other words, we're not going to go come and get any contradictory information necessarily. We're just focusing on the article itself written by Niels Christian Witt, which gives him the permission to show you the photograph of the current Pope, who is then Cardinal Ratzinger, with Vasily Redain. It's at website cdf-tlig.org. Here we go again, but I'm going to download the PDF full report. Here we go again. Here's the photograph. Now, we're repeating this time with no anecdotes stated by me. Between 2001 and 2004, Mrs. Vasily Redain had an official dialogue with the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, CDF, in the Vatican that was requested by the then prefect of the CDF, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, now Pope Benedict XVI. The purpose of this report is not to provide cheap propaganda for Mrs. Redain, but rather to offer some balanced and detailed insight into the progression and outcome of this dialogue. It must be emphasized here that the dialogue did take place and that it reached a cautious but positive conclusion. The entire dialogue between Mrs. Redain and the CDF was published in the form of a booklet in 2004 and at a specific request of Cardinal Ratzinger in all subsequent versions of Mrs. Redain's books entitled True Life in God, reminiscent of other cases. You know what? CDF critique that were clarified through dialogue. As it will become clear in this report, Cardinal Ratzinger had first declined when asked in 1999 to meet Mrs. Redain because of the situation with the notification, as he put it. However, what he did offer was an official dialogue with the CDF. It was this dialogue and its positive outcome that made it possible for Cardinal Ratzinger to receive Mrs. Redain along with Niels Christian Witt in private audience in November 2004, during which he took the picture below. Here's the picture. It must be understood that the dialogue in itself entails no official approval, and approval will be defined below of the True Life in God messages experienced by Mrs. Redain. The notification of 1995, with some critical comments on Mrs. Redain's experience, remains formally in effect. Only the publication of a new notification could cancel, and cancel would be redefined below, the former of 1995, and such publication will most likely not occur during Mrs. Redain's lifetime, given the Vatican's always careful stance on alleged mystics still living. Just imagine what happened with Faustina Kowalska. When Mrs. Redain asked Cardinal Ratzinger during this audience what the CDF would reply when asked about her status, he answered, well, we would say that there have been modifications in the sense that we have written to the interested bishops that one should now read the notification in the context of your preface and with the new comments that you made. And you can see below in dialogue. Let's see if I can click on dialogue. On this PDF, you can't click on the dialogue. There are at least 3 reasons why Niels Christian Witt took up as his duty to relate the facts of this dialogue. First, requested dialogue of the then Cardinal Ratzinger following an interview with him published in Communio 1999 and elsewhere. From 1997 to 2001, Niels Christian Witt wrote his doctoral degree on the issue of Christian prophecy at the Pontifical Gregorian University. It contains a paragraph on the case of Mrs. Redain as a possible historical example of an experience seen by many as prophetic. It was published by Oxford University Press in 2007 with a foreword written by the then Cardinal Ratzinger. See Christian-prophecy.org. After the said doctoral studies, I taught, or Niels Christian Witt taught theology at the Pontifical Gregorian University, and thus he lived in Rome from 1997 to 2004, and was able to closely follow and engage in the dialogue. Hence, he is a witness to all that occurred. 3. Some people have raised doubts concerning the legitimacy or positive nature of the dialogue. partly because of a somewhat enigmatic letter from Cardinal William Levada, the present prefect of the CDF, dated January 2007, that he would put into perspective below, which he will put in perspective below. Thus, in this report, he wishes to dispel possible doubts concerning the legitimacy and positive outcome of this dialogue. This report covers the following: the preamble of the dialogue from 1995 to 1999, the dialogue itself from 1999 to 2004 that was concluded with the aforementioned meeting between Cardinal Ratzinger and Mrs. Redain, the subsequent developments arising from Cardinal Levada's letter on January 2007. All letters mentioned in this report are on file with the author. For important purposes, copies can be obtained by contacting him at n.c@hvid.com. Niels Christian Witt, Associate Professor, Research Unit of Health, Man and Society, University of Southern Denmark. The preamble. In 1995, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith issued a notification of 1995 regarding Mrs. Vasula Redain. The notification was sent to all Catholic bishops' conferences in the world. As stated in the notification, the investigation leading up to its publication brought out, in addition to positive aspects, a number of basic elements that must be considered negative in the light of Catholic doctrine. The notification of 1995 was confirmed in a second notification a year later that addressed some confusion due to the fact that the first notification had not been signed. This was the situation regarding Mrs. Redain and her books entitled True Life in God, TLIG, when Niels Christian arrived in Rome in late August 1997. He had taken his master's degree in theology at the Theological Faculty of the University of Copenhagen, a state university almost entirely informed by Lutheran theological heritage. Hence, as a Roman Catholic, it was only natural for him to pursue graduate work in Rome. He was inscribed at the Pontifical Gregorian University, and there he continued his research on the theology of Christian prophecy under the direction of Father Professor Elmer Salmon of the Pontifical Institute of Santo Anselmo. Having read works of the then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, he ventured to ask him for an interview on the topic of Christian prophecy. He first asked him after one of the Thursday morning masses in the German seminary, Campo Santo, inside the Vatican. Cardinal Ratzinger was present at most of these morning masses, and he attended many of them, because they were in his mother tongue, German, and beautifully celebrated. During periods when there were many pilgrims, the church would be full, but outside of the peak months, we would have only the seminarians and a couple of German residents in Rome. At this particular celebration, he was with Professor Yvonne Maria Werner of the University of Lund of Sweden, who has translated books written by Cardinal Ratzinger and is very well versed in his theology. Together we approached and asked him for an interview. He kindly replied that I should write to the CDF for this request, which I did. The above-mentioned letter requesting the interview with Cardinal Ratzinger was sent on the 19th of February, 1998. He received a positive reply from Cardinal Ratzinger's personal secretary at the time, Monsignor Joseph Clemens. 16th of March, 1998, the interview took place 1 month later in Cardinal Ratzinger's audience hall in the CDF. Professor Werner was present during the interview. Before the interview, Niels Christian Witt had sent his questions to Cardinal Ratzinger, and he had prepared himself beautifully. The interview lasted 50 minutes, and the Cardinal was very eloquent and produced a level of reflection that was ready for print almost to the letter. After transcription and editing, he sent the text to the CDF for approval and received it back with minor edits some weeks later. As he asked Cardinal Ratzinger the last question regarding Mrs. Redain, the interview here, his voice suddenly changed. He raised his arms up high and exclaimed, "Oh, that is a large and problematic issue. Perhaps it would be best to leave this for now." I allowed myself to insist, asking him, "But people have said that Mrs. Redain has been condemned by the Vatican. Is this true?" He answered. His reply was prompt. "You have touched on a very problematic issue. No, the notification is a warning, not a condemnation. From the strictly procedural point of view, no person may be condemned without a trial and without being given the opportunity to air their views first. What we say is that there are many things which are not clear. There are some debatable apocalyptic elements and ecclesiological aspects which are not clear. Her writings contain many good things, but the grain and the chaff are mixed up. That's why we invited Catholic faithful to view it all with a prudent eye, to measure it by the yardstick of the constant faith of the Church." I asked, "Is the procedure to clarify the question continuing?" Cardinal Ratzinger answered, "Yes, and during the clarification process, the faithful must be prudent, maintain a discerning attitude. There is no doubt that there is an evolution in the writings which does not yet seem to have concluded. We must remember that being able to set oneself up as the Word and image of interior contact with God, even in the case of authentic mysticism, always depends on the possibilities of the human soul and its limitations. Unlimited trust should only be placed in the real word of the revelation that we can encounter in the faith transmitted by the Church." 29th of May, 1998, he sent a letter to Cardinal Ratzinger asking him for permission to publish the interview in the Scandinavian journals Signum and AC Review, once he receives the CDF's edits. Later, he received permission to have it published elsewhere, Comunio 30 Giorni, and other publications. 23rd of January 1999, he sent a letter to Cardinal Ratzinger in which he expressed concern about the harsh words, "The grain and the chaff are mixed up," spoken of Mrs. Redain. Later, he met him again in Campo Santo and talked with him about it. At that time, he was adamant about the said critique. When I asked him to reconsider the words concerning Mrs. Redain, that the grain and the chaff are mixed up, he quickly replied, "Well, they are." End of story. At the time, Cardinal Ratzinger was still convinced that there were unhealthy elements in Mrs. Redain's writings. This was the situation when I spoke with Mrs. Redain about the possibility of a formal dialogue with the CDF. Mrs. Redain knew that the outcome could be worse than the 1995 notification. The notification had only been a warning, as Cardinal Ratzinger said during the interview. However, a formal dialogue could result in a condemnation if the CDF would deem the writings heretical after the dialogue. But since Mrs. Redain is entirely convinced that they originate in Christ himself, she did not seem to hesitate for 1 second to take that risk, and thus was willing to engage in dialogue with the CDF. The actual dialogue. On the 1st of June 1999, he asked the then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger at morning mass whether he would be willing to meet Mrs. Vasila Redain. He very calmly replied that this would not be possible at the time because of the situation that followed with the 1995 notification. Nevertheless, he said that he would like her to meet his secretary. Then Archbishop